Saying is weather forecasting is pretty easy when it's like today, but some days you're never quite sure if it's going to rain, whether you should have that umbrella, raincoat, big coat, light coat, whatever. And this stuff is a bit like that. It's a bit more like the I'm not sure if it's going to rain number, because there are certain things that we can see in terms of demographics and predictions, but the politics in BC can change that in an instant. So everything I'm going to say is the best evidence that we've got, but it's somewhat unpredictable, a bit like the sound, I guess. So some of the context is pretty obvious. We have the definable geography, we have urban schools, rural schools, we have different configurations. Although it's interesting, when you get expanding enrolment, things like middle schools are easier to set up. Declining enrolment, some of them go away because you can't fit the numbers into the buildings. But what's really interesting are the changing demographics in British Columbia. And it's these demographics that we're going to look at. Now, I'm just interested in knowing whether anybody here ever accesses the provincial data set. Could you show me if you're familiar with what I'm showing you now? Okay. If you're not, and you're looking at mentoring, I should take a look at these provincial and district reports. You see on the, hang on, I've forgotten how you do this now. The pointer. You see here you have the provincial and district reports. These are incredibly rich sources of information. And we're going to be referencing some of these as we go along with the presentation today. Structurally, you can look at things within a district or within a union that meets the needs that you've got. So you have your staffing, you have your hierarchies and decision making, and you have your committees. Sometimes when we're looking at structures, people sort of confuse the structures with the processes. One of the things we've learned in inquiry groups is once you've got the logistics sorted, it's the process that's really crucial. I don't know if people are familiar with Mitchell and Sackney's work, but it's basically saying structures can facilitate or they can destroy things. And I think it's really interesting. Mitchell and Sackney had 2 books. That was the first, 2009. And I think now, so I'm not sure, this may be the slide you were referencing yesterday. Just have a read of that for a moment. So if I were to ask somebody from UBC, what was the culture at UBC, they'd perhaps tell me something about that. Rita, if I were to ask you whether you think everybody at UBC would have the same view of the culture of UBC as you do, would you think they would? Okay. Who's, Naylor, if you're the superintendent of Delta School District, you're talking about the culture of Delta. Would you think that that would be seen similarly by, say, the union president? Okay. So now we've got divergent views then of culture. Is that an issue? Is that a problem? Or is it a positive? Why? Okay. Okay. So point number one is there can be divergent cultures, different cultures within a space. That may or may not be problematic. A divergent culture could be divisive, or it could just be people seeing things in different ways. But I really think we've not got to the bottom of the cultural debate in British Columbia. So Hargreaves and Shirley separated and made a distinction between structure and culture. Structure about roles and responsibilities, but culture is about habits and belief. Goes deep below the surface, takes considerable time to understand, and is much more difficult to transpose. Structure is about what we do, culture is about how to be. So if you think about that concept of structure, it's more physical, it's more obvious. And in mentoring terms, it's often the logistics that go with mentoring. Setting the room up, having some process of involvement with the district and the union. Some of those things are structural. Once you've got beyond that point, it's what happens within the space that's really important. And one of the things we're finding with the collaboration work we're doing across British Columbia, and as Denise knows, we worked last year in CUNY Columbia with groups of principals and teachers looking at collaboration for professional learning. One of the things we found there was that the issue of culture could become quite divisive. When teachers started going back into schools and saying, how do you see the culture of this school? In some cases, there was some considerable concern in the discussion. So it's a difficult subject. So we have all these references, and I won't plough through all of this, but it's basically about the traditions and that dreadful phrase, I think it's dreadful, this is the way things get done around here. If ever there was a put down for a new teacher, that's it. This is the way things get done around here. Now sometimes that's said explicitly, and sometimes it ain't, but that new teacher knows that's what it is, in some cases. And actually one of the wonderful things that happened in CUNY Columbia was we had a teacher, a new teacher, who was both in the mentoring project and she was in the inquiry group. And one of the things she said, well, it's wonderful to get into a space where her voice was heard and respected. And I think that's all, in a sense, I'm sort of suggesting with this cultural debate that we take the lid off it. We don't go for the glib sort of phrase, quote about culture, but we start to open it up. And I think it's a dangerous thing in some cases to open it up. But I think it's essential. Because I think when it really comes to it, to get mentoring or any other innovation going in schools, you need the logistical piece, the structural piece. You need the commitment from people. You need the money, the time to do it. But once you've got past that, you really need the process within the room to do it. But beyond that, and pervading all of it, is the cultural piece. And if we can't get a better culture of learning, then we won't really get positive mentoring experiences or any other professional learning experiences. The problem in British Columbia is that the politics trumps pretty well everything. When you had declining enrollment from from say 2000 through, the common refrain from government was, if you have declining enrollment, we have to have fewer teachers. The actual statistics are actually telling a totally different story. Not this statistic, but when student enrollment declined by 3.5%, teacher numbers declined by 7.8%, double the rate of decline. As you can see in this slide, in the years 2008 to going through those 4 years, full-time enrollments increased, but full-time teaching positions decreased. Now you have a situation in British Columbia where funding decisions can impact teacher supply and demand. It's as simple as that. If you have a fiscal frame that says education has to manage within a certain amount of money, and that's it, which is essentially what we've had for quite a while. And I mean, it's not unknown for either set of government to push that line. Then you have to fit within it. And usually what that means is reduced employment for teachers. Now this is a nice neutral comment. Being from the BCCF, we kind of like this one. But what I'm trying to say here is, whether you agree with that or not, I don't think anybody would disagree that we've got a troubled provincial cultural context in British Columbia. I'm not arguing the politics or the sides here. I'm actually saying most people would agree. Several people have written about the school wars. Crawford Killian's quote here is a reminder. And the next scrap that's coming up, advance notice for the fall, is probably going to be attendance management. Because school districts were informed last week that every school district now will have an attendance management scheme, which basically means if you get sick, somebody's likely to knock on your door and say, notice you've not been too well recently, what's going on? And that's going to, again, exacerbate what I would see as a problematic provincial culture. There's been quite a few other more academic comments on this, by the way. There's a really interesting one that shared with the Metro Mentorship Network a while back, and it showed that across Canada some provinces were more collaborative, consensual in their decision making, and some were more conflictual. So the prairie provinces tended to be more consensual. Saskatchewan's edged away from that a little bit now, but generally speaking, the culture there was that people got together, thought about things, and didn't just implement it. Whereas BC was on the other edge of that. It was highly conflictual, and conflictual over time. So, what we're going to go into now are some of the things which I think are going to show that the terrain is moving. I actually think we've got a radical shift coming in British Columbia in terms of some of the population changes and that impact on enrolment. The labour market predictions are startling, and it's going to impact schools, I think, and education system in a big way. And then the teacher demographics are a third one coming up there. So this is the Statistics Canada projections for population in British Columbia. What we've got here is 2010 going through to 2030. What we've had for some years, and this graph doesn't show it quite as dramatically as one I did earlier, is a steady decline in the population. We are actually right here. We're right at the bottom of that line. So what's happening from now on is the 0 to 19 population in British Columbia up to 2030 is on a consistently upward trajectory. There are more people of childbearing age going to be having children in the next 15 years than in the last 15 years. Many, many more. It's dramatic. If you look at that, the approximate shift or increase in students is 120,000. 120,000 more students in BC. It's about 500,000 now roughly. I'm not sure the exact number, but it's around there. So that's a pretty big shift. Now, you know that first chart I showed you with the provincial data? This is from this. What I want you to do is to look at the yellow, the ones in yellow first. So what we've got are from 2010 to 2014, the actual enrolments in British Columbia public schools. So can somebody just maybe tell me what they see in the 5, 6, 7, the yellow? What's the general picture going on in grades 5, 6, and 7? You want to give it a go?
Going down.
Sorry?
It's getting smaller.
It's going down, right? There's a steady decline in the numbers of students in grades 5, 6, and 7. Okay, now look at the grey line, grade 4. What's going on there? It's pretty static, right? But now look at the yellow. The blue, green, whatever it is. My wife, she won't let me pick paint at the shop, so I get all the colours wrong. She says, "No, wait, pal, I'll do that." So look at these numbers here. If you look at grade 3, you've got a slight growth there. Grade 2, you've got a fairly reasonable growth in grade. So what we're seeing here, you know, on that previous slide, where you start to see this upward trajectory, we're seeing that coming out in BC schools right now. So the kindergarten, the push will continue over the next 15 years if these projections are correct, and I think they are. So you will get this pushing through into the higher grades in schools. So the secondaries right now are not affected by this growth because it's coming, obviously, kids are being born, they're coming into the system, and more and more and more of them are going to be born in the next 15 years compared to the last. So you're going to get a really significant shift, and this is going to change our school system in British Columbia in a pretty major way. Now, one of the interesting debates going on at the moment is around the school closure issue. And I think, you know, school districts would be incredibly responsible right now, not in terms of necessarily closing schools, but in terms of disposing of school properties. Because they're going to have a hell of a time in 10 years' time, in many districts. Not in all, but in many. Any thoughts on that? Are people, where are the Souk folks? Where are you? Go on, Sue, confess. Okay, hi. Could you tell me, is that something you're seeing particularly in Souk? Yeah? So basically, you know, it's the districts like yours that are probably seeing this the first, right? And a few others that we'll look at. But is it impacting? Can you just give us a general sense of the impact? Is it impacting construction or?
Yes, in terms of elementary schools, thinking about these numbers are full, and having we have some fairly newly built elementary schools that are
Right.
already having to add on or add portables, or
Sure.
because the numbers at Lecter take on our.
They're pushing through now. And Anne, in Surrey? What are you seeing in Surrey? Sorry about that. Knew you were just getting your emails sorted out. It's bad, isn't it? I'm on to you. Sorry, Anne. No, go ahead. Yeah. And, I mean, portable is an issue there too?
Absolutely, yeah. Lots of portables.
Right.
And I know the district is buying land to build new schools.
Right.
The waiting list for new schools is long because of the, I guess, because of the lack of funding coming from the provincial government
Right.
to build new schools.
Yep. Yep. Sorry, you're going to add something there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm from Maple Ridge.
Right.
And we have
Sorry.
a ton of growth in terms of subdivisions and housing, but it's in particular pockets. So we have some schools which are literally bursting at the seams, and then other schools like the one I've just left where we have 5 empty classrooms and there's no growth at all. So the district is continually trying to rejig boundaries to adjust that, and now they're looking at different ways to draw students to schools that are underpopulated. And they're also having trouble with funding because they look at the average across the district.
Yes. Yeah.
So they're saying, no, your schools are not at capacity.
Yeah. And if you go to Maple Ridge, as I do occasionally, you can really see that. You can see these pockets of massive housing expansion. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Charlie, one other thing we forgot to mention, it's kind of interesting, we had a new elementary school built in 2008. Had about
Right.
800 kids in it.
Uh-huh.
It was a dual track school. And
Sure.
The program has grown to the point where it's becoming a single track school. All the English kids are being sort of farmed out to the different schools, which are already quite full.
Mhm.
Again, purely because of population.
Right. Now, it's interesting, isn't it? That discussion was really about structure, right? I mean, I started, it's my fault, but you know what I'm saying? It's actually, we talk about this and we talk about buildings, but the interesting question is, what's that going to do to your culture in the district? And one of the cultural shifts may be that you're getting something we haven't really experienced before, a large number of new families interacting with the school system. So what's that going to do to our culture as teachers and educators? What's it going to do when we start to see, as I think we will, this shift towards many newer teachers in the profession? What's that going to do culturally to our schools, to our professional learning experiences when those people come into the schools? So when we see these shifts, one thing I'm arguing is don't just look at it from a structural perspective, really think about it from a cultural perspective. And in some places, we may need to think literally of culture. Our new cultural groups coming into our schools. We've just been doing some work on adult education, and one of the stunning things I found out was the metropolitan government-assisted immigration into Vancouver. The top 5 or so countries of origin were Myanmar or Burma, Iraq, Afghanistan, and one or two others that just slipped my mind. But there are countries where we haven't had traditionally much immigration from. So that's going to really impact some of the metropolitan school districts. I remember going to Surrey once to this SDA meeting. There were a group of teachers there who went into school one day, and there were 30 Karen refugees from the Burmese jungle in their school. They didn't know they were coming. These kids had never been in a school before. They had no clue what to do with them. They were just saying, you know, help us because we're not sure what to do. So think culturally as well as structurally is the message. Okay. The labour market outlook document is something, again, you really should read. I'm a little bit sceptical about some of those numbers. When you see our friend Christy talking about 1 million jobs in British Columbia, this is what she's actually talking about. She's talking about 68% of those are coming because people are retiring, and 32% of those jobs are from economic growth. So in teaching, this pattern is going to be very similar. We're going to actually see a large number of retirees. I know we've heard that before, but you know, I think it is coming this time. Really going to do it this time, although I've got a bit of a caveat there. But look at some of these numbers, you'll be kind of shocked, I think. Well, this is actually not the numbers yet. But this is one other really interesting thing. Around 2019, you get the graph for demand and supply of labour crosses. Right now, you've got an oversupply of labour. Same in teaching. We've got more teachers than we have jobs, if you look at it strictly from, you know, that equation. But in 2019, you're going to have a higher demand for labour than we have supply in this province. Now, the impact of that could be significant for education, because what happens in a tight labour market is that private sector employers start looking around for adaptable, creative, quick thinking, on the feet people. And one of the places they find them is in the education sector. And if you think I'm kidding, I'll show you an ad in a minute, but in Britain, I think it was around 80s, late 80s, British Airways was looking for a lot more cabin crew for its European and international flights. They wanted people who could speak more than 3 words of French or Spanish or whatever. They went into British schools and recruited modern language teachers. And they got them. Hundreds of them. So hundreds of teachers left teaching jobs in Britain to go serving coffee for British Airways and meet grumpy people like me on the plane. But what I'm saying is, and this is a really interesting one, I thought I'll just take a look, see if I can see anything right now that illustrates this. It took me 20 seconds to find a company that was looking for teachers right now in Canada. So this is the investors group, and look at what it's saying. See how your skills work outside the classroom. Are you ready for a change? And it's to become a financial advisor, right? Now, it's a joke, yeah, but this is what, you go into the internet, I'm not kidding, 20 seconds it took me to find this. This is an ad to get teachers out of classrooms into being financial advisors. But look at the characteristics down the left here. Flexibility, control of your career, training, mentorship and support. What they're implying is we'll give you the stuff you're not getting in education. It's clever advertising, and it often hits the mark. And one thing I'm suggesting it's going to hit the mark more is with men than women. Because men, when we do surveys of teachers going into a bargaining round, and we ask teachers, what do you want? The men want the money. Simple as that. Give us the dough. I mean, this is a simplification, but it's generally the case. And more women say, we want the conditions, right? So my suggestion is that when things get tight in the economy, in the labour market, in terms of increased demand for labour, I think more men will leave teaching to go into all the sectors, and I think that will increasingly feminise the profession. We're already seeing this slow shift. I think we're around 71, 72% women in teaching in British Columbia public schools now. It was 69% not that long ago. Now the issue with that is a gendered profession generally, and I hate to say this, gets a lower status. Women's professions generally get lower status than men's professions. It's unfortunate, but it seems to be the case. I'm not arguing for it, I'm just saying that it often is. So, these same job projections list some of the professional areas. These are projected job openings in British Columbia. Secondary and elementary school teachers. This is just how they define it within the labour market projections. 24,900 teachers required across BC between now and 2022. It's only 7 years. That's a pretty big shift. This shows the expected changes in the numbers by region. And again, you can see here the replacement. These are the retirees, basically. That's what they're projecting in terms of retirement. And this is what they're projecting in terms in terms of replacement in this chart here. So if you look through there, you can see, you know, traditionally the three big areas, Lower Mainland, the Southern Vancouver Island, and the Okanagan, Thompson Okanagan area are the three areas of fairly significant increase in demand. And you can already see that starting to pan out to some extent. But the interesting thing about all of this stuff is that we have these differences. Maple Ridge, you were talking about differences within your district, which is really quite intriguing. I hadn't really thought of that. But when you look at British Columbia, you see enormous differences between districts. So that again just reinforces that. It's kind of interesting. They use these numbers like 90%, it's actually 86%. But who's counting? It's just, you know, BC government, not to worry. But basically, about 2/3 are in that mainland, you know, Vancouver, Greater Metropolitan Vancouver area. So we're going to see a huge shift in that area in particular. One of the other things we did was we started to look at the years of teaching experience. And you've got a big chart on there. The reason for that is when I put it on a PowerPoint, it's just ridiculous. You don't need to worry about it. Just sort of relax and sort of think about this rather than flying through it. But what we've done is we've said, well, how many teachers do we have in BC with fewer than 5 years of experience, and how many with over 20, which might give us some sense of where things are going. And you can see they're both strangely in decline. But what I want to show you here, if you look, for each year, you can actually see the different colour for each year represents a particular year and then the age group below. Now this is one thing that I think is kind of startling. What we have in BC is a steadily increasing number of people over 65 working as teachers. The numbers aren't big, but the percentage increase is significant. And I think that's interesting and unusual. Now, part of the reason I think for this, and I haven't gone into this in great depth, but I suspect a big reason is women who have lost pensionable years and are now looking at their pension and saying we've got to work longer. But it's an interesting sort of shift in the demographic. It's constantly going up. It's a very constant. The other thing that's of some concern is the relative lack of people under 30 in teaching. And I think that's a reflection of the difficulty of people getting employment in the last 10, 15 years. You know, if you can't get a job, then you're often, by the time you do get a job, you're closer to 30 anyway. So I think that's panning out in that. But all these data, I think, are interesting just to see where we're going in terms of the general demographics. This is the chart from hell. It's that sort of thing that you hate to see in a PowerPoint, I know, but that's why I gave you the big sheet. So this is the same thing on the big sheet. But the reason it's interesting to look at it is you can see some incredibly obvious differences. Now, some of these, where are the Stikine folks? Yeah. Hi, Stikine. You know, the thing with something like this is you can get a couple of people in Stikine and it sends something off the chart, right? So don't take it too, you know, badly. But poor old Stikine there is the only place in the whole of British Columbia with that demographic. But you get a couple of people that will look totally different. You did. Well done. Well done. So what we've got here are some obvious regional differences. And one of the big differences in the metropolitan Vancouver area, you tend to have less of a gap. You tend to have more people in that less experienced group than you do in the more experienced group. So what we did then is we said, okay, well let's make it life a bit easier. What does it look like for each region? So if you look at the Kootenays, for instance, Denise, I'd be a bit worried if I were you.
They're going to pay us.
Oh, they're going to pay you, okay. So basically what we're looking at, if you look at Kootenay, Columbia, is quite a gap. A very high number of teachers with more than 20 years of experience and a relatively low number of teachers with less than 5. If I were looking at that, I'd be thinking you may need some mentoring stuff coming up. Would you agree?
Yes, going into our 4th year.
Okay. So you're well prepared. Again, but if you look at areas like Arrow Lakes, you see a quite different one. But again, the numbers in Arrow Lakes are very small. So you can see some of the obvious differences there. Let's go to the metropolitan area now. And again, you can see some quite big differences here. For instance, Vancouver, quite an aging population of teachers, right? And again, reflected in the minimal growth rate of Vancouver. Most of the growth in Vancouver, in the metropolitan area, has been in that eastern, southern sector. You know, the Maple Ridge to an extent, but more predominantly Surrey and out towards the Fraser Valley. But what you've got here is an aging population in the city of Vancouver. But there are pockets of growth. It's interesting around the West End where there's more significant growth of high-rise. There you've got some growth. But generally, this is the anomaly in the metropolitan area. North Van, slightly similar, but not much. When you look at, actually Surrey's not in this one, sorry. If you look at this, that's the classic shift that we're going to start to see that's in Surrey right now. So you've got a shift there where you've got more teachers with fewer than 5 years of experience compared to the teachers with over 20 years of experience. So I would suggest that's a sort of a healthy sign in many ways, that you're getting that shift in the population. Maple Ridge, again, I'd be a bit worried about that. Yeah. Deborah, sorry, from Gulf Islands.
Are you talking bodies or FTE? Because when I look at the Gulf Islands on here, it surprises me.
Right.
And we have a lot of our newer teachers have like 0.2, 0.3, 0.4.
I'm pretty sure this was FTEs. I'll check it though. Yeah. Anybody from Mission? You better get them in. Have a look. Look at Mission, 16 and 32. Mission is going to need mentoring in the not too distant future. And I would suggest Mission is possibly a population growth possibility, right? Because of its location. Okay. If you go to the Okanagan, again, very interesting picture in central Okanagan, where you've got a pretty even mix of numbers there. But you do have some interesting ones. Okanagan Skaha is a bit of an interesting one where you've got, again, significant number of older teachers. Where's Angie? Oh, there you are, Angie. And so what do you see going on in your district or local? Is that, would you?
Oh, definitely.
And just in your sense of retirees, what's that looking like? What's the scuttlebutt on the ground in Okanagan and Skaha about?
We've had fewer and fewer retirees in the last under 2 or 3 years.
Right.
But the potential, we think, is significant.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I've seen some districts just last year or two with a real flurry of retirees, and others where you'd expect it. It's not happened at all. So it's an odd picture to get a handle on, right? But again, you look at Okanagan and Skaha, but you look at a couple of those districts there. But again, I think the issue with central Okanagan is you can clearly see the population growth around Kelowna, which is boosting that district in terms of its numbers there. Some of the northern districts can tend to be pretty extreme in their fluctuations, and again, part of it is the small numbers. These can change very radically with the shift in any small number there. Southern Vancouver Island and Sunshine Coast, Pell Rivers, in with that group is a pretty interesting picture. Again, you tend to have. I'd be a little bit edgy in Nanaimo, and again, the Powell River is a significant difference. The reason I'd be edgier in Nanaimo than Powell River is because I would anticipate higher population growth in Nanaimo, just purely because of its economic factors there. But again, some interesting shifts going on. North Central, Again, the only sort of one where you've got any significant change is Prince George, which is a bit of a surprise to me. I wasn't quite expecting that one when I saw that. Now, I must say, these were put together pretty quickly. As Alison knows, we had a couple of headaches with this. So if you do spot a mistake, let us know. 60 data sets, quickly done. It's possible we got one or two wrong. So we'll check Gulf Islands as well, Deborah, to be on the safe side there. But you see what are we doing? We're looking at general trends and concepts here. So look at Victoria. Again, I was surprised at this one. Victoria traditionally had a much older teaching population, and it's shifted quite a bit in the last few years, so it's kind of evening out much more. But look at Souk. I mean, that really shows you where the shift is starting to take hold, and I think that's a pretty significant shift there. And the Gulf Islands too. Again, we'll check that, Deborah, to be on the safe side. Some shifts going on. Oh, sorry, that was the Peace River. And again, this consistent pattern in the Peace River zone of more teachers with less experience. So again, this reflects the classic BC experience. You get your teaching qualification. In some cases, you head north, you stay there for a few years, you come back again, right? I mean, I'm not saying it's universal, but it's reflected in these data. Okay, so what? So I think the important thing is to have some reflection and thinking about what this all means. Because I think there are certain questions that come out. And I think one of the things is, are these things consistent? Are they going to stay the same? And I would argue in some cases they probably are. I know the North looks to shift that pattern of people going up and coming back. But I think it's going to be a tough one. And I think the reason it's going to be tough is because you're going to have increased demand down south. If you didn't have that demand, it might be more possible. So, I mean, without being too negative, I'm not sure the mentoring is going to keep people up north when it comes to the crunch. So it's just an interesting possibility there. We can already see that some districts have changed significantly. So when you look at Souk, when you look at Surrey, West Vancouver was another curious one. You can see some real shifts in the teacher demographics. See more people, more younger teachers, particularly in those districts. You look at some districts, it looks like it's same old, same old. But the problem is, it ain't going to be same old in 5 years. Well, that's a possibility, and I think it's a strong possibility. So if I were looking at the Nymos, the Maple Ridges, possibly the Missions and a few others, looking at some of those graphs, I think you've got big changes coming. So if you're not mentoring now, then you should be thinking about it. You should be laying the foundations, not just for that, but for the whole professional learning experience. So the other question is, are these predictions accurate? We don't know. I mean, we can only go with what we've got. But again, you are seeing a demographic in British Columbia with an aging population. The odds are good that more people will actually, this time, finally get the hell out of schools and go and play golf or whatever people do when they retire, right? But the next question is, if this shift in employment does take place, if you get that point where the demand for labour exceeds the supply, will people start coming into the education sector and essentially poaching teachers? And I think they will. I think the investors group is just tip of the iceberg you had on the other day. It's just starting. And the problem with that, and it is to an extent a cultural problem, is that unless we address some of the negative issues in British Columbia schools, the working conditions in the schools, I think a lot more people will exit. And I'm not sure there's a political willingness to look at that. So I think if you have a choice between a job without tension, with higher pay, potentially higher pay, and the flexibility that those guys at investors were offering, people could be tempted. And again, my argument is that more men would be tempted than would women, because generally men make those decisions. We have found evidence for that. And I think the working conditions might impact retention and attrition. So I don't know, that's my conjecture, but I sort of think when things are stressful, and again going back to the cultural piece, if I'd have asked people about the culture in schools post-strike, you'd get some pretty interesting feedback. I mean, I don't know what your reactions were or your experience, but when I'd be going into schools, people would kind of say, leave us alone, just, you know, keep out of the way. I'm just getting on with it, put my head down. I don't really want to know about any new initiatives that you're coming up with. Did people feel what in schools over my, yeah. It was just a sense that, you know, like, give us a bit of space here. So culture can shift, and I think unless we do address some of these working condition issues, unless policymakers and the people who decide salaries address those issues, I think we will see an exit. And it's really interesting, but supply of labour can increase when you pay more money. It's a pretty simple equation. If I get more money, I ain't going to leave. But if I get less money, or the conditions are hostile or negative, then I'm more inclined to leave. You're looking sceptical. Any thoughts on that? No? No, fair enough. But, you know, I'm open to a challenge. You don't have to agree.
The last question you had up there, have you looked at maybe the impact of the working conditions and the effect it might have on privatization of schools?
Well, again, that's when you look at the demographics. That's the other shift that I possibly should have brought into this, which is the private school enrolment. There's actually two factors which can really shift. One is a private school or independent school enrolment, and the second is distributed learning. Right? The more distributed learning you get, the less demand you have for teachers, because you can have a higher workload or caseload or whatever you want to call it, right? So in this case, the privatisation scenario is the shift into private schools. And of course, the enrolment in private schools has been climbing at a much higher rate than the public school sector. So we have, you know, there's an issue there, clearly, and it's an issue partly compounded by the cultural animosity within this system, which is impacting not just us, but families and everybody else. It's interesting, you know, we've done 2 surveys of teachers. We did one in 2009, and we recently did an adult educators survey, people teaching in adult education, being K to 12, and we had a list of stress factors. They were sort of categorised, so, you know, it was working conditions and this and the other. Number 43 on the list of 54, we're really good at finding stress factors, we know lots about that, but there were 54 factors that we tabulated. Number 43 was the attitude of the provincial government. So it wasn't up there as number 1 saying, you know, make sure you tick this one and, you know, give us some ammunition. It was 43. In 2009, among teachers, it was the 5th highest rated stress factor. So what was happening was that teachers were saying they were impacted, their stress level was impacted by decisions made at the provincial level or by the attitude at the provincial level. When we did a survey of adult educators last year, it came in as number 1. So we've seen over the last 5 to 10 years, not only a sense among teachers that their stress levels are higher than they were 5 years ago, and that's been consistent. People saying, I'm more stressed out, my job is more complex, I have more tasks to do than I had 5 years ago. And so I think that when you see that, and I can get that on the sort of day-to-day, what really surprised me was how many people said, it's the provincial stuff that really gets to me. And I was frankly surprised. I didn't think it'd come out that high, but it did. So yeah, some of those factors, Angie, privatisation, it's a good point, and working conditions could really impact that. So again, this is fairly obvious, but where housing is cheaper and employment's accessible, school districts are more likely to have significant enrolment growth, with young families moving to the Surreys and the Souks, the affordable housing, or more affordable housing, it's all relative, obviously. But the other sort of strange one in BC, or not strange, but it's the towns where this whole industry is crucial, right? So if you get an upsurge in mining or forestry, both of which are likely in the next 10 years, then those towns which are single industry towns will see a boost in enrolment because families will move there. And similarly, where you get those things closing down, you'll see a decline. So it's an interesting kind of conundrum. And of course the LNG, who knows? I mean, hey, you know, I think the joke was every time Christy opens her mouth, all that comes out is liquid natural gas. But anyway, that was just an aside. But you know, we don't know where it's going with LNG. It could be big, it could be a total bust. We don't know. So when we look at mentoring, I think it's really interesting to think about the context. I think it's interesting for you to think, possibly to think about where is our district in comparison to us? What's happening? Where do we fit in this picture? What's going to happen, you know, where we are now, where we're going? But the other thing is the cultural piece, I just think is so huge. And we've been doing some work recently with people from the health ministry. We're working on a lot on mental health issues, both teacher and student mental health. And in working with health ministry people, we have totally different cultures. They talk about things in a different way than education does. And they have ideas that will not fly in education. It's difficult to explain exactly, but they have certain ways of looking at the world within the health sector, and we have ways of looking at it within the education sector, which we all know about. But when you go across, it's where there's a bit of a collision. So one of the things I think is going to be really important in the future is to actually do some work on figuring out each other's culture. And one of the things about mentorship, which is really important, is that the people doing the mentorship work who are really good at this work are people, I think, are the folks that we've called in other studies system navigators. They can actually work within union cultures, and we talked a little bit about this yesterday, Brooke, I think, didn't we? They can work in union cultures and work in management cultures. And it's interesting that, because some people can't. Some people are fantastic in a management culture, but bring them into a union setting and all hell breaks loose, and vice versa, right? It can happen. That you're good in your own culture, but you can't cross it. And with mentorship, it's really important that you go across those cultural lines and you start to understand how management systems work if you're in a union, or what the union sensitivities are if you're in management. Because if you do that, you can build something together. And if you don't, or if you act unilaterally, as some districts might, in pushing an initiative, then you're going to break that cohesion. So I think the cultural piece is within and across our organisations. But the other piece is that I would never assume that any culture is seen the same by anybody within it. As I said before, when we started opening up the question of culture in Columbia schools, and we asked people to start having conversations in their schools about culture, some people got pretty hot under the collar about it. Because it opened up things that the tacit, the understood things, didn't want to be made explicit. If you and I have a bad working relationship, and we don't talk to each other, or we're really negative, or I'm trying to, mess you around every time I can, everybody might know that in a school, but nobody wants to actually bring it out. Say, okay, why don't Alexandra and Charlie get this sorted out? Why don't we build a better culture? So opening up can be difficult, and it can be, a tense and dangerous thing to do. But I think with the mentorship, I think it's really kind of important to try and do that, to open up the thinking about culture. Oops. So the other thing I've been thinking about is about this silo concept, and how I work in my inquiry stuff, and Alison does her mentoring stuff. And more recently, we've been talking about how can we actually consider what's common between inquiry and mentoring. And I think there's a huge amount that's common. I mean, the whole idea of a professional conversation is implicit in inquiry, and it's implicit or explicit in mentoring. The point in mentoring is you have a conversation about practice, whether it's one-on-one or whether it's within a group. Is that right? Within inquiry, one of the key things we're arguing is that you hold a professional conversation. Now, the point about professional conversation is how do you do that? What are the skills inherent in a professional conversation? Now, I think it would be useful for inquiry and mentoring to sort of get more together in developing and extending the process skills of conversation and other areas. Because it's kind of difficult in some ways, because you get possessive. I get possessive about the inquiry stuff. You know, I don't want them in it. You know, we'll do it this way. But I think what we've got to do is open our doors to a greater extent and find out what we're doing that's common between us, because that way we can build a culture. We can build a culture of inquiry, and we can build a culture of learning, which should say, which incorporates inquiry and it incorporates mentorship. So that mentorship doesn't have to keep going the way it's going now. Inquiry doesn't have to keep going the way it's going now. We can build a foundation which includes both. And I think that foundation will be much stronger for the mutual learning that we get from mentorship and that mentorship would get from inquiry. So I think that's the direction to go in. And it's the process skills. It's how to hold a professional conversation. It's how to engage in using protocols. For instance, when you use that text yesterday, we are not alone, was it? The Beyond Solo Teaching? Yeah. Some of the protocols we use in inquiry are text analysis. It's how to get a group quickly looking at an article and actually getting into a discussion mode on that article. Now, I'm not saying you don't do that in mentoring. I'm just saying we use those protocols all the time. So can we swap them? Can we actually get together and share those ideas? The networking, I think one of the great things that I've seen in both the Metropolitan Mentorship and this is that you're building a much better networking system than I see generally in British Columbia. I think the networking here is pathetic, generally. We don't have a provincial support for networking. If you look at Ontario, they're much more developed in terms of a ministry that actually supports its teachers and builds connections between them. We don't have that here. But to your credit, and Alison and other folks' credit, and the Metropolitan Network, you've done some fantastic networking. And you've got evidence to show and to share about. The other thing, although some of I love the stuff you've got on the website, but I think we have to make a combination of in-depth research and short, accessible communication. When we speak to, we're also doing a project on school connectedness. Okanagan Scarha was involved in that. And one of the things we found with, again with health ministry funding, was that what teachers said they would most likely access are short 2-page articles. You know, they're not going to read a research piece. Unfortunately, nobody reads most of the stuff I put out, but you know, that's life. I had a great quote once from a researcher who said, the average piece of academic research is read by 7 people, and one of them is the author's mother. I just thought that was pretty neat. I'm not sure I get up to 7, but there you go. So what I'm saying is I think it's a really interesting mix, and Rita, and you might have some thoughts on this. How do you do the in-depth research? Well, not how do you do it, but we should be doing in-depth research, which really explores the idea of mentorship. But we also need the quick, accessible communication pieces, the videos and the other things that teachers and others and administrators and policymakers can access as well. So what I'm arguing for is that dual approach where it's a really in-depth work and you get some serious research going on, where you need people like, you know, no, but you know, you need the universities, we need that going on. But if you keep that accessible communication going too. Okay, that's about it. I think what I've tried to do here is just sort of say, in my view, the terrain is shifting, is going to shift very significantly in the next 10 to 15 years. And I think, in a sense, you're well placed to sort of figure that one out and figure out where you act within those changes. But I also think that unless we actually put a little less emphasis on structure and a bit more emphasis on culture, we're not really going to get the significant change that we need. And so I think we need to take the lid off the cultural piece in much more detail about how do we build a learning culture, not just how do we build a mentorship culture, but how do we build a learning culture and where can mentorship fit. So if you do find mistakes in there and you want to tell me about it, which I hope you will, we'll correct them, and the PowerPoint will be accessible for you on the website. I think Devon, have you got it? Where is she? Where's she gone? It's already up. You're just too efficient for me, I don't know. Anyway, thanks. Are there any sort of questions that come up? Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on what
think that would be a wonderful thing to explore, though. I mean, I think, Colleen, you were talking about the teachers who were the old stuffy teachers, but who actually showed remarkable interest in change. And I got that experience too. I've seen this, and it's usually male, I have to say. I've gone into rooms where there's been 2 or 3 guys kind of, doing this. And when you engage those people in conversation, I find they've got a huge amount to offer, but they're cynical about the outsider coming in and telling them which way is up, right? But I think it would be interesting to ask that question. And one of the reasons it would be interesting is because we've got this wealth of experience in our schools that is actually, I think, dying to be tapped.
Well, I think there's a wealth of experience at both ends,
Absolutely.
and it needs to be reciprocal. And yeah, so I was just wondering about that.
But it would be great. It would be a great research question to ask. And I think, it would be interesting to float that in some of the districts like the Surrey Souk, saying, what does it mean? What's happening to us in our district, and how do we maximise the learning from our new teachers and from our veteran teachers or more experienced teachers? Great question.